Hello and welcome to Firefly's Healthy Habits webinar series. Today is our second installment of this series, and we'll be talking all about sugar. For our topics of conversation today, we'll be starting out with talking about and reviewing the forms of energy. We'll talk about some facts about sugar, share some truths about artificial sweeteners, and we'll talk all about the causes of sugar cravings and what you can do to curb those cravings. Most of us, let's face it, our relationship with sugar usually starts with the sweets that we ate as children. So start thinking about, what was your favorite sweet as a kid? Mine was ice cream. I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire, and the next town over had this great farm that had a restaurant, they had horses, and then they also had an ice cream stand. And one of my favorite childhood memories was going to this ice cream stand and getting butternut crunch ice cream. So ice cream was definitely something for me as a child that was my favorite thing. And even better if it was a brownie sundae. So as I mentioned, for a lot of us, our connection with food starts in childhood. And so those kind of become things that in adulthood that we turn to for comfort, or that we turn to just for the sake of the good memories that they invoke in us. So think about, for you, what was your favorite sweet as a kid? So let's talk about forms of energy. So there are 3 macronutrients that we get from food that provide the body with 100% of its energy that is needed for growth, metabolism, and other body functions. So those 3 macronutrients are carbohydrates, fats, and protein. Carbs and protein each provide us with about 4 calories per gram of energy, and fat has 9 calories per gram. All of these are essential. Carbs actually provide us with the quickest form of energy, and the fats are the slowest burning form of energy. Carbohydrates, in that case, are also the body's preferred source of fuel, because when we eat carbohydrates, it actually raises our level of serotonin. And like all carbohydrates, sugar provides energy. So sugar is one of those simple carbohydrates that occurs naturally in foods such as grains, beans, vegetables, and fruit. When that's unprocessed, so when we eat that naturally occurring sugar in food, it contains a variety of vitamins, minerals, enzymes, and proteins. So things like brown rice or other whole grains, when we cook those, we chew and digest them, those natural carbohydrates break down uniformly into separate glucose molecules. And those molecules then enter the bloodstream, where they're burned smoothly and evenly. So that allows the body to absorb all the good stuff that we're getting from those carbohydrates. Refined sugar is another story. So it's very different. It's extracted from sugarcane or beets. There's some other refined sugars that we'll talk about later. It lacks vitamins, minerals, and fiber, and so it requires extra effort on the part of the body to digest those. The body actually ends up depleting its own store of minerals and enzymes to absorb sucrose properly. So therefore, instead of providing the body with nutrition, it actually creates deficiency. It enters swiftly into the bloodstream, and then it wreaks havoc on the blood sugar level. First, it pushes it sky high, causing us to maybe feel excited or nervous or kind of hyperactive. And then it drops extremely low, which could then lead to fatigue, depression, feelings of weariness or exhaustion. So many of you might have experienced this for yourself. You eat something that's got refined sugar in it, you have that initial burst of energy, and then you very quickly afterwards feel like you're crashing. So that's from those refined sugars that we digest. There's also some compelling evidence that the energy that we're obtaining through beverages is interpreted and processed very differently in the body from the energy that we obtain through solid foods. It's because of this that often the discussion around sugar turns to how much sugar are we getting from beverages? We actually consume a high amount of sugar from beverages, and sometimes we don't even think about how much sugar are in those sources. And it's not giving our body the energy that we really need in order to function properly and to, go get through our day. So that's about carbohydrates. So now let's talk a little bit about fats. Fats are important for growth and development. They absorb certain vitamins, they maintain our cell membranes, and there are three main types of fat. So we know that fat in the past has gotten a really bad rap, but there's different types of fat, and we could do a whole another topic on this, and actually I talked a lot about fats in the last Healthy Habits webinar series. So if you missed that, maybe go back and take a listen through that, where we talk a lot more in detail. But the three main types of fat are saturated, unsaturated, and trans fats. So the ones that we want to limit are those saturated fats. The ones we want to completely eliminate are trans fats. And then those unsaturated fats are the ones that are good and healthy for the body and help us with all those other great things that I said fats are great for. So, oftentimes we kind of lump all of those together and think that fats are bad. However, fats are really important to the body. It's one of the main 3 macronutrients. We want to make sure we are getting fats. We just want to make sure the source of those is from those unsaturated fats. So again, if you want more info on that, check back in with the previous Healthy Habits webinar series, which I'll be posting a link to that as well. And then there's protein, which actually helps regulate the release of the power, the release of the energy that the body's getting from the fats and their carbohydrates. There's a lot more, again, about protein in the previous presentation webinar. Also wanted to just quickly talk about fiber. Fiber refers to certain types of carbohydrates that pass through the intestinal tract and help move waste out of the body. So fiber helps keep your energy steady throughout the day. And many of us don't get enough fiber. So one way to fix that is by making sure you're eating more beans, more whole fruits, more vegetables, and whole grains to make sure that you're getting that good supply of fiber. So I just wanted to get us all on the same page, talk about those different forms of energy. Again, I didn't go into this in a lot of great detail, but check out that first of the webinar series if you want even more information about this. So this quote here, it says, like heroin, cocaine, and caffeine, sugar is an addictive, destructive drug, yet we consume it daily in everything from cigarettes to bread. So sugar, the reason it qualifies as an addictive substance is because eating even a small amount creates a desire for more. And then secondly, if you suddenly quit eating sugar, it causes withdrawal symptoms. So things such as headaches, mood swings, cravings, and fatigue. And I don't remember the exact name of the study, but I've read about a study where it was with rats who they offered up either sugar water or cocaine, and the rats actually chose the sugar water. So definitely an addictive substance. And when we think about what happens to the body when we're consuming that refined sugar, there's a lot of things that go on. First, we get the spike of insulin. That's a fat storage hormone, so that causes the body to store fat. It also pulls fuel from the bloodstream to help counter that spike of insulin. So then the body thinks you're starving. So what does it do then? It slows down your metabolism because your body doesn't want you to starve. The body doesn't want to starve. So you've got this trifecta. You eat refined sugar, it causes you to store fat, it makes you hungry, it slows your metabolism. So what do all those things do? They make you gain weight and make it very difficult to lose weight. So if you're eating a lot of those refined sugars, you might be noticing you have weight gain, or if you're trying to lose weight, but you're still eating refined sugars, you might find that it's very difficult for you to lose weight. So let's talk about some of the facts about sugar. In 2015, Americans consumed an average of 126.4 grams of sugar a day. So to put that in terms that are maybe a little easier to visualize, that's almost 30 teaspoons of sugar per day. That's higher than any other country in the world. And again, this was from 2015, so that number may have even gone up in the past 4 years. It's also generally agreed that sugar should account for no more than 10% of our caloric intake, but the actual consumption is significantly ahead of this in virtually every market in the world. Sugar is also one of the most important agricultural commodities that's traded internationally, and that annual value of world trade exceeds over 24 billion US dollars. So let's talk about some of the sources here of sugar, which we'll go into a little bit more later, but just as an example, a 20-ounce bottle of soda contains the equivalent of 17 teaspoons of sugar. So there you go. That's how we're getting to those 30 teaspoons of sugar per day. Oftentimes they're coming from beverages because people aren't thinking about what they're eating or drinking, rather, as part of a contributing factor. And then we often hear from the food industry that the answer to this obesity epidemic that we have is more physical activity. But if the third bullet point here, for a 110-pound child or person, it would take 75 minutes of riding a bike to burn off the calories in one 20-ounce bottle of soda. So really it's stacked against us. If we're eating and consuming and drinking a lot of these products that have refined sugars, we're just putting ourselves in a position where it's virtually impossible for us to then get enough exercise to counter those calories that we're taking in from all of these products that are being marketed to us. Also, one soda a day increases a child's chance of obesity by 60%. And globally, 35% of adults are considered overweight and 12% are obese. So there's definitely a health issue here, but the obesity epidemic is not only a health issue, but also an economic issue. The global obesity crisis costs over 600 billion US dollars in healthcare. So it's definitely something that's a great concern for not only health, but also economic reasons. I wanted to share with you this next graphic, which comes from the documentary Fed Up, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. There are 56 names of sugar that you might see on food labels, and sometimes you'll see more than one of these in one product. And we know to expect sugar to be found in the usual suspects. So things like cakes, cookies, candy, there's sugar in there. But you also find sugar now in canned vegetables, baby food, cereals, peanut butter, bread, and even tomato sauce has added sugar. And it's often disguised and labeled as things like corn syrup, dextrose, maltose, glucose, fructose. So all of these things that you might not immediately recognize as sugar, and again, some products are going to have even more than one of those on the label. So you might not really understand how much sugar is actually in some of these products, because you're not expecting there to be sugar in your tomato sauce or your peanut butter. There's also even some so-called health foods that contain sugar. So there's like a lemon poppy seed Cliff Bar has 21 grams of sugar. That's 5 teaspoons. So you compare that to a chocolate glazed cake donut from Dunkin' Donuts that has 14 grams of sugar or 3 teaspoons. Some of those things that you might think are healthy have a lot of sugar in them. You might also think that your afternoon cup of coffee has just a little sugar. But if you're getting, say, a 16-ounce Frappuccino from Starbucks, that contains 44 grams of sugar. So that's 10 teaspoons. So think of that, that's the equivalent of eating 3 donuts if you're looking at how much refined sugar is in those products. Another one that's very common in a lot of packaged processed foods is high fructose corn syrup. So you'll see that as HFCS sometimes, the sweetener from cornstarch. And the amounts of fructose vary with the manufacturer, but it's actually sweeter than regular corn syrup. So that in particular is one of those refined sugars that is causing a big uptake in the amount of sugar that we're consuming. So let's talk about some of the sources of added sugar. So if we think about the food groups that contribute the highest percentage of our total added sugar for the American diet, but when I say added sugar, I mean sugar that's added to the food during the manufacturing process, not sugar that's naturally occurring in food like fruit. So according to the USDA, the beverage industry now accounts for 33% of total sweetener delivery. So again, that's why it's often a topic of conversation when we talk about sugar. We end up talking a lot about sugary beverages, and this is why. So 33% of our total sugar that Americans are consuming are coming from soft drinks. Then you have on here some of the usual suspects like sugar and candy, cakes, cookies, pies. We all kind of know that those have sugar in them and that those are things that we should limit how much we're eating of. But you'll see here 16% is coming from sugar and candies, almost 13% from cakes and cookies. Another one that often we don't always think about is all the added sugar in fruit drinks. So things like fruit aids or fruit punch. 10% of the amount of sugar that we're consuming are coming from those drinks. Also, dairy often has sweeteners added, so added sugar, especially yogurt. That's one of the ones that is often sweetened. So added refined sugars are added to yogurt to make them tasty. So almost 9% of added sugar in our diet is coming from those dairy products. And then other grains, things like waffles, cinnamon toast, things like that, that have those refined sugars added in. Those are also made this list because it's more than 5% of the added sugars to the American diet. So now that we know some of those sources, let's talk about food labels a little bit. Food labels show the amount of sugar in grams, but then it doesn't give you a percent of daily value like it does for the other nutrients and other things that are in food that are listed on the food label. So it's difficult for most of us to understand what that means because we don't really know like what how many grams of sugar make a teaspoon. So this slide is to give you a better visual representation of how many cubes of sugar, because cube is something you can really visualize, is in each of these items. And a small cube of sugar is equal to 4 grams. So if you're looking at a candy bar, that usually has 6 cubes. An energy drink, 7. And if you think about just how many energy drinks teenagers might be consuming these days, that can be a lot of added sugar in a day for them. A pint of ice cream has 21 cubes, a couple of pancakes with syrup, 9 cubes, and then a single cookie, 4.5 cubes. So this just is to give you a better kind of visual of how much sugar are you really consuming. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about some other tricks of the food industry. So food companies, one of the things that they've been really focused on is reducing calories in food, because we've gotten kind of caught up on this low calorie craze, and how do we limit the amount of calories that we're taking. So they've started replacing refined sugar with artificial sweeteners so that they can reduce the calories in processed food. However, these artificial sweeteners can have worse effects than eating or drinking the extra calories that you get from things that have just the regular sweeteners. So things like aspartame. So it's usually sold under the brand names NutraSweet and Equal. That's a particular concern. It contains 3 well-recognized neurotoxins. So the following symptoms have been associated with the consumption of aspartame. So things like headaches, dizziness, insomnia, memory loss, anxiety attacks, joint pain, heart arrhythmia, increased appetite, slew of other issues. So you might be getting less calories in the food that you're consuming that has aspartame, but it's causing all these other effects, which then, especially the increased appetite one, that will cause you to seek out more calories. So really just taking the extra calories rather than looking to these artificial sweeteners is probably your better bet in the long run, really. There was also an in-depth review of sucralose, which is marketed as Splenda. This was published in the Journal of Toxicology and Environmental Health. It showed that sucralose raises blood sugar and insulin levels, reduces the number of beneficial bacteria in your gastrointestinal tract, and it can possibly damage your DNA and cause some other issues. So again, probably not your best choice to be consuming products with these artificial sweeteners. Sucralose is one of the most widely used artificial sweeteners in production today. It's very versatile. It can dissolve. So that's one that you'll see a lot. And we're sold on the fact that these products are low in calories, like I mentioned, but it's important to just understand and know the side effects of these chemical substances in the so-called healthier alternatives. So there's some others listed here, but I won't go through those in detail. I think you get the point here. So you're probably familiar with some of these sweeteners. These are our natural sweeteners. So things that are not processed and made, but are naturally occurring. So things like agave, maple syrup, brown rice syrup, those are things that I'm sure you're familiar with and have seen. Dates and date sugar, honey, stevia is from a plant. So there is a lot of products now are using stevia. So there's a refining process that goes through taking stevia from the plant and putting that into processed food, but these are all more natural alternatives to those refined sugars. So I want to pause here and just ask you to step back and think for a moment. Can you identify the sources of sugar in your diet? What do you think are those sources that are contributing the most to your diet? Maybe you don't eat a lot of packaged processed food, but you are drinking a Starbucks Frappuccino. So, what are some of those sources of sugar in your diet? So just take a moment and think on that. I want to move on next to causes of cravings. So we already went over that sugar is addictive. So obviously when we are consuming sugar, it's making us want more sugar. But there are other reasons that we might be craving sugar. Some of these are non-biological causes of cravings. So in my coaching program, I talk a lot about primary food. And so if you're not familiar with that, it's those other things in life that nourish us that are not food that we take in. So it's things like our relationships, our physical activity, the work that we do. So those are all things that give us nourishment. If we're having some issues or feelings of lack in some of those areas, it might be causing us to crave food to help fulfill some of those places where we might feel like we're lacking or just unhappy in these areas. And then there are some that are more biological. So things like not drinking enough water. Often we're dehydrated. So we sometimes might think we're hungry when really we're just thirsty. So a tactic that you can use here is if you're feeling hungry or you're feeling a craving for something, drink a glass of water, wait 10 minutes, see if you still have that craving. Yin and yang balance, I'll actually talk more about that on the next slide. So I'm going to skip over that for now. Another one that we mentioned early on this presentation are sometimes we crave things that give us comfort or good memories. So foods from our childhood or foods that are common in our ancestry. So those might be things that are causing us to crave certain foods. There are also seasonal cravings. So often our body is craving foods that help balance the elements of the season. So for example, in the spring, we might be craving more detoxifying foods like greens or citrus. In the summer, we might be craving things that are cooling. So things like raw food or fruit, or in this case of talking about sugary foods, ice cream. We might have a lack of a certain nutrient that we're trying to get more of, and so that could cause some cravings. De-evolution, I want to touch on this one a little bit because it's kind of counterintuitive. Sometimes when things are going really well, we have a self-sabotage and we crave foods that throw us off. So it's likely not conscious, it's more in our subconscious, but we purposely throw ourselves off track. So those are just some of the things that can cause us to have cravings. I want to spend a little more time talking about the yin and yang balance. So in traditional Chinese medicine, they talk about this balance of yin and yang in the body. And you'll notice on this more yang side, there's a lot of animal foods. So things like cheese and fish and chicken and red meat, we're eating a lot of those. Oftentimes we'll have a craving for more yin foods. So you'll notice sugar is on that yin list and coffee. So we can create more balance by eating more of the other foods that are here on this yin list to help balance out our yin and yang so that we're not having those cravings for sugar. So if we're eating more leafy greens, we're eating more root vegetables and winter squash, those can help balance out that yin and yang in the body and help prevent us from then having that craving for sugar. So another chance to pause and just think for yourself for a moment. Can you relate to at least one of those causes of cravings? So is there something that stood out on the list to you as something that might be behind your craving for sugar, other than the fact that maybe you're addicted to sugar? So just take a moment for yourself to think about that. You know, is there something from that list that jumped out at you that might be something for you to take a look at? All right, so now that we know the causes of cravings, let's take a pass through some tips to help you curb those cravings. So usually when we eliminate something from our diet, it's important to do it for at least 7 days. So things like caffeine, or if we are reducing or eliminating sugar, we want to do that for 7 days. That gets us through kind of the withdrawal symptoms. It gets us into this space where we've kind of cleared it mostly from our system. And then afterwards, when you add those things back in, like if you're adding sugar back in, for example, you might find that those things that you liked before actually now taste too sweet for you. So, so that's one thing you can do, is just try to, avoid those added sugars, reduce or eliminate those refined sugars, and just see how you're feeling. Many of us, especially here in Colorado where we're at elevation, many of us are dehydrated. So when you feel thirsty, that means your body is already dehydrated. So drinking more water is a way that you can help giving your body what it needs, help you curb those cravings. Another way to get that sweet taste and to help curb your desire for eating things that are sweet are to eat sweet vegetables and fruit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Another thing to do is get physically active. So being active, it actually helps us balance our blood sugar levels. So it boosts our energy, reduces tension, and then that eliminates our need to kind of self-medicate with sugar. So getting active, getting those more natural boosts of energy are going to help us curb those cravings for sugary foods. Some more items here to go through. When we're in a chronic state of stress or sleep deprivation, our body is going to crave the quickest form of energy, that's sugar. So if we are making sure that we're getting a lot of sleep, a lot of rest, that we're relaxing, we're not stressed out all the time, we're not in that chronic state of stress, we'll likely have less cravings for sugar for that quick energy. Going back to those yin and yang principles of eating that come from traditional Chinese medicine, if you're eating too much animal food, which is on that yang list, it can lead to cravings for sweets, which are yin. So evaluate the amount of animal food that you're eating and start adding in some more of those vegetables, those leafy greens and beans, help balance out that yin and yang. The fat-free and low-fat packaged snack foods, those tend to contain high qualities of sugar. So that's to kind of compensate for the lack of flavor and fat. So those are going to send you on a roller coaster of the sugar highs and lows. So if you take a look at, if you are eating a lot of packaged fat-free or low-fat foods, take a look at the amount of sugar that's in there. Every craving is not necessarily a signal that your body biologically requires sugar. So a lot of cravings have a psychological component. So by identifying those psychological cravings that you're having or causes of cravings and substituting lifestyle adjustments, you can begin to balance that and take charge of your health. So oftentimes I have my clients keep a food mood diary, especially if they have a lot of cravings, to write down what you're feeling right before you eat a certain food or when you start to crave it. So that will help you start to notice if you have a pattern or a connection between what you're feeling and what you're craving. So sometimes it's stress, sometimes it's boredom. So just start to look for those connections, and you might be able to identify, okay, here's a possible reason why I'm having this craving. And then what can I do to help fulfill that need or manage that, whatever that emotion is that's causing us to have that craving. So look for those ways to slow down, to find ways to get nourishment in your life from places other than food. The other one on here is just to experiment with things that actually naturally sweeten your food. So there are certain spices that you can use, like coriander, cinnamon, nutmeg. Those are all going to be things that will give more natural sweetness to your food and might help curb that desire for sweet. So the sweet vegetables that you can experiment with adding to your diet to help satisfy your needs for something sweet. This is a great time of year for squashes and sweet potatoes and yams. So those are all great options. Some other root vegetables like carrots and beets, onions, those are all things that are going to add sweetness in a nice naturally occurring way without having all those refined sugars. So with all of that in mind, another chance to pause here and think about, is there at least one thing that you can start to do today to curb your cravings? Just take a moment, think about that. If you go back to, was there something that you could relate to on the causes of cravings? And then what can you do to counter that? What can you start to do now to help counter that? So we're moving right along here. Next slide is where to go for more information. So I mentioned earlier that graphic that had the 56 names of sugar. That's something that came from fedupmovie.com. So Fed Up was a documentary that was really largely focused on obesity in the United States. It also talks a lot about the effects of sugar on the body. It follows a few kids to talk with them about some of the challenges that they experience in terms of food choices. And then also the website has a lot of facts about sugar, a lot of resources there. So that's something that you might check out if you want a little bit more. Another thing that you can do is sign up for our newsletter and visit our website and visit our blog. So fireflycommunity.com, you'll see there's a tab for our blog. Share a lot of information there about nutrition, about lifestyle. So just a lot of different things on there. And then if you are on our newsletter, we'll be sending out soon a challenge, a Beat the Sweets challenge, in which we will all work together to work on eliminating or reducing those refined sugars from our diet for a period of 14 days. So if you subscribe to or are already on our newsletter, you'll see information on that really soon. Another one that I didn't put on here is Dr. Mark Hyman. He has a book out that talks about blood sugar, and he has a lot of resources on his website about sugar, about obesity. So that's Dr. Hyman, so DrHyaman.com is another great resource. Another thing, if you're feeling like you want a little help in getting on the right path and that journey to healthy habits, you can schedule a free consultation with me. So I've got the link here. You can either copy and paste this, or if it works in the recording, you can click on it, which it might not actually work in the posted version of this. But if you just go to Firefly Community or fireflyyogaretreats.com and go to book online, that's another tab. You can book that free 60-minute consultation with me, and we can talk about what some of your health concerns are and how I might be able to help you to, again, get on that path to a healthier, happier lifestyle. That covers all of our slides. I want to thank you very much for your time today. I hope this was valuable for you and that you learned something new and something that you can take back with you and start getting yourself on that healthier path. We will have more of these webinars coming up in the Healthy Habits webinar series, so watch for that. And thanks again for your time today. Have a great evening.